Hello there, and a very good evening. I'm Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. The first meeting of French and British commanders with their counterparts in Kyiv. They take the first steps to establish the structure of the coalition of the willing. President Zelenskyy says that this structure should be determined within the next month or so. So when could we see the first European soldiers arrive in the war-torn country? We'll get to that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Tensions rise in the east. Hybrid war continues on the Polish-Belarusian border. More and more ordinary Poles prepare themselves for war. And Trump wipes out trillions overnight in a global trade war. As the coalition of the willing begins to establish its mandate and structure with Ukraine, President Zelenskyy says it shouldn't take too long to establish the details. It remains unclear when European troops will arrive in the country as Russia continues to delay a ceasefire. Now let's go to Kyiv and our correspondent Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So what more can you tell us about these talks?
Well, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with the defense chiefs of the United Kingdom and France in Kyiv. This follows on from discussions between their counterparts and the Ukrainians on Friday. So 2 days worth of talks and meetings to be had there. As to what the Ukrainians are getting out of this so far, while President Zelenskyy gave a quick statement. So let's listen to what he had to say about it.
We had the first meeting to sum things up, marking an important first stage. It is not only the three countries that took part in the meeting. Ukraine, France and Britain are part of the process. There are many other countries. I do not want to say how many countries in this coalition yet. It will be a coalition. I think we need about 1 month, no longer, in our view, before we fully understand the structure. There is a good understanding among our partners what Ukraine needs, where the geographically sensitive places are, where we would like to have support. It was important for me to discuss strategic questions, not only questions concerning numbers, but also questions concerning the mandate of the structure. It is important for me to give dates when we would like to count on the contingent.
Now, President Zelenskyy met with British Admiral Anthony Radakin and French General Thierry Burkhardt in Kyiv for those further discussions. Now, these meetings take place following on from the summit that Emmanuel Macron had at the end of March for the coalition of the willing, these nations willing to potentially deploy a reassurance force in Ukraine following any eventual ceasefire. Now, we are still no further closer to any ceasefire with Russia. However, the Telegraph, British newspaper, are reporting that Emmanuel Macron is being looked at as the potential European leader that may act as a go-between, as representing Europe in any potential discussions with Putin to maybe apply some European pressure following on from what the Americans are doing. Either way, it still looks like we are no closer to a ceasefire with this terrible attack happening in Ukraine on Friday, killing so many people in the central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih, one that has also caused a bit of a diplomatic stir in that President Zelenskyy has directly commented on the announcement, the statement on it from the American ambassador. He drew some criticism there. So it's been a difficult weekend for the Ukrainians. However, they are hoping that these kinds of talks with these defense chiefs will bear fruit in the coming weeks, should any ceasefire be reached. We still seem a long way away from that at the moment, though. Back to you, Don.
All right. Oz Chatterjee reporting there from Kyiv. Thank you for that report. Now, a Russian missile and drone attack on Kryvyi Rih has killed 19 people, including 9 children, leaving 2 more in critical condition. A total of 68 have been wounded. Several European leaders have condemned the attack, but it's the words of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, that are raising eyebrows. Posting on X, she said that horrified tonight, a ballistic missile struck near a playground and a restaurant in Kryvyi Rih. This is why the war must end. Now, she failed to condemn Russia and the Kremlin for carrying out the attacks. President Zelenskyy described her timid response as unpleasantly surprising. Pavel Shaskovsky has the story.
Local residents are bringing flowers and toys to the playground in Kryvyi Rih. A Russian missile strike hit a residential area, killing at least 19 people, including 9 children.
How could one adequately take it? There was a 1-year-old child's birthday celebration at the cafe. Then there was a meeting of beauty industry professionals. They just gathered there and talked. To bury children is the worst there could be. It shouldn't happen. Whatever the Russians are writing about us, calling us Nazis, the idiots should take a look at themselves.
The Russian strike set several buildings on fire and caused severe damage. Besides the 19 people killed, more than 60, including 12 children, were wounded. Some are in critical condition, and doctors are fighting to save their lives.
There were dead children laying there, crying parents. It was horrible. And there was the crater with smoke coming out of it where it hit.
Russians fired an Iskander-M ballistic missile with a cluster munitions warhead, designed to target people and vehicles. Hours later, another drone strike followed, killing 1 more person and wounding 7, in Kryvyi Rih, Volodymyr Zelenskyy's hometown.
My condolences to their families and loved ones.
Condolences and condemnations come from around the world. Kaja Kallas, High Representative for Foreign Affairs, described the attack as tragic and inhumane and called it reckless. Czech Foreign Affairs Minister Jan Lipavsky referred to it as Russian terror and barbarism. The US ambassador to Ukraine issued the following statement.
Horrified that tonight a ballistic missile struck near a playground and restaurant in Kryvyi Rih. More than 50 people injured and 16 killed, including 6 children. This is why the war must end.
Which prompted a rather strong response from the Ukrainian president.
Unfortunately, the response from the US Embassy is surprisingly disappointing. Such a strong country, such strong people, and yet such a weak reaction. They're afraid to even say the word Russian when speaking about the missile that murdered children.
In the same message, Zelenskyy stated that Ukraine needs more air defense systems to protect against precisely these types of missiles attack, something only the US can supply.
Probably top of the line is heavy missiles, Patriot air defense missiles that are really the only weapon system that can protect Ukrainian cities from Russian ballistic missiles.
During a call last month with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Donald Trump agreed to help Ukraine acquire additional Patriot air defense systems available in Europe. The last batch arrived in Kiev from Israel at the beginning of this year. Pavel Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Poland's border with Belarus remains a battleground in hybrid warfare, with illegal migrants attempting to cross while border guards are ensuring that no one gets through. According to reports from the Polish ministry, the intensity of both illegal crossing attempts and attacks on border guards is escalating daily. Franciszek Pilis has the latest on this hybrid war.
While these clips may appear similar to others published by the Polish Border Guard, they depict new border crossing attempts, of which there are dozens, if not hundreds, every day.
The pressure on the Polish-Belarusian border is increasing. Attacks are more common. Yesterday we saw a group of attackers made up of dozens of people. The brutality of these attacks is increasing. Migrants are throwing rocks and branches, cutting through the border fence with saws.
In just the first 3 days of April, the number of illegal border crossing attempts from Belarus reached 400 cases. The video you're seeing right now shows the latest of these attempts, a group of 22 people trying to slip past the guards. 5 of them stayed behind the fence, reportedly filming the incident to later use it as promotional material for smugglers, encouraging future attempts to travel through Poland to Europe. This, in turn, only motivated the Polish government to not only combat illegal border crossings, but also address the very idea of trying to reach the Polish border.
Soon, we will begin an information campaign in the 7 countries with the largest number of migrants who are trying to illegally cross the Polish border. Our message will be clear. The Polish border is airtight. Do not believe the smugglers. Don't believe Alexander Lukashenko or Vladimir Putin. They are lying to you when they say that this is the entry point into Europe. This is untrue. You will not be able to apply for asylum here, and you will not be able to cross the border illegally.
Poland is also in the process of recruiting more and more people to safeguard its borders. This includes compulsory firearm training for teens, as well as the formation of new military brigades, such as the freshly sworn-in 11th Lesser Poland Territorial Defense Brigade. However, Poland is not alone in its efforts to secure the EU's and NATO's eastern flank. According to Andrius Kubilius, the EU's defense commissioner, new regulations are coming to help bolster defense capabilities for member states.
Cohesion funds, we passed no changes into regulation on cohesion funds in commission, so now they need to be approved by council. And we are, with our proposed changes, it will be allowed for member states in a voluntary way to use the cohesion funds which are allocated to them to invest them into development of defense industry.
For now, however, Poland will have to rely on what it has on hand, as the wave of illegal migrants isn't showing signs of waiting for Poland's mass investments in defense industry to pay off in the future. For TVP World, Franciszek Pilis.
China continues to expand its global influence, making vast investments in developing countries and creating bonds in bilateral relations fueled by indentureship. One example is Cambodia's new naval base, a state-of-the-art port, the envy of many nations, places the country in a unique relationship with the sleeping tiger, which may have more strings attached than meets the eye. Sasha Farbach reports.
Cambodia's new naval base, featuring a massive pier for larger ships, a state-of-the-art dry dock and advanced facilities, has officially opened. But with China footing the bill and overseeing the upgrades, Western critics are keeping a close watch. Despite concerns, Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen is optimistic, highlighting the importance of strengthening ties with China for the country's future.
This new naval base opening is taking place about 2 weeks before the official state visit to Cambodia of China's President Xi Jinping. His visit is planned for 3 countries, Malaysia, Vietnam and Cambodia, and his visit to us shows the solid friendship with our country. Starting from today, Cambodia will welcome all friends who want to participate in any joint military drills here. We have nothing to hide.
The ceremony at the Cambodian naval base highlights China's expanding global influence through its Belt and Road Initiative, launched by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013. The BRI aims to connect China to Central Asia and Europe via transportation hubs and ports. However, due to geopolitical tensions and the war in Ukraine, China is now focusing on a new trade route called the Middle Corridor. This route bypasses Russia and includes Kazakhstan and other Central Asian states to improve trade and infrastructure. However, experts warn that China's support often comes with strings attached, raising concerns over influence and debt.
When China and Russia get involved in these big projects, and they have been in China and has built some of these renewable energy projects, when they invest in this, the Central Asians incur big debts from this. They don't have the money to do this for themselves. So the Chinese or the Russians loan them this money.
To counter China's growing influence, the EU has committed 10 billion euros to create an alternative infrastructure network called the Global Gateway. At a recent summit, the EU aimed to build stronger ties with Central Asia by offering a more transparent and sustainable alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
They help to fund the construction, and they bring in the know-how and construction companies to do it. But when they leave and when the project is finished and the factory or whatever they built is done, it is Central Asian at that point. It belongs to them. They might have some small amounts of money to pay back, but nothing like the debts that they've incurred to Russia or China in the last 10, 20 years. which come into the billions and billions of dollars. And in some cases, for the smaller Central Asian countries, are going to be impossible for them to pay off for the next 20 or 30 years.
China has also extended its reach into Europe, particularly focusing on ports. Chinese companies now control 31 container seaport terminals across Europe. Their investments have sparked controversy, including China's takeover of Greece's Piraeus port and a recent stake in Hamburg, raising a national concern. Meanwhile, the port of Gdańsk, Poland's largest and the only deep water port in Eastern Europe, with a direct China link, is growing in strategic importance. The port recently signed a cooperation deal with the port of Yibin, posting direct trade routes between China. As Beijing expands its influence through land and sea, it is also reaching into the digital realm. TikTok, with over 1.6 billion users, continues to grow globally. Despite its ongoing popularity, TikTok faces a potential ban in the U.S. President Trump has once again extended a 75-day reprieve to find a potential buyer. With this, China's ambition now extends beyond trade and into the digital realm, raising key questions about the future of global tech, security, and commerce. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
Donald Trump's worldwide trade war is already putting a strain on the global economy. We have seen vast declines in major stock markets worldwide, not seen since Donald Trump was last president, and the outbreak of the coronavirus, which put the brakes on the world economy. Many experts are now sounding the alarm that Trump's so-called Liberation Day will liberate consumers from any surplus disposable income and drastically rise the cost of living, especially for Americans. Konrad Gorlinsky breaks down this economic war of choice.
Markets are not responding too well to President Donald Trump's latest tariff decisions. Wall Street closed the week with its biggest losses since the pandemic. The Nasdaq dropped over 10% last week, confirming a bear market for the tech-heavy index. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average also saw major declines, despite positive growth in the defense sector. These losses worsened after China announced retaliatory tariffs of 34%.
It's an economic Armageddon that was unleashed by Trump, and the tariff war has begun, and we believe, this could set tech stocks and the tech industry in the U.S. back, potentially a decade.
We have a market that is throwing a temper tantrum, frankly, rightfully so.
The situation in Europe wasn't any better. The Pan-European Stock 600 index dropped over 8%, its sharpest weekly decline since June of 2022. The FTSE in London didn't do much better.
I wouldn't call it a free fall on the financial markets, but rather a sell-off. And the sell-off is ultimately related to the fact that Donald Trump has now set something in motion, which is, of course, a spiral, an escalation spiral.
Here in Poland, the main blue-chip VIG20 index dropped over 10%, while the broader VIG dropped 8% for the week. However, both indices are still at record highs. The Trump administration doesn't seem too concerned. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio shared his take after the recent NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels.
No, their economies are not crashing. Their markets are reacting to a dramatic change in the global order in terms of trade. But ultimately, the markets, as long as they know what the rules are going to be moving forward, and as long as that's set and you can sustain where you're going to be, the markets will adjust.
Sentiments may change after further clarifications next week, but as Rubio said himself, a dramatic shift in world trade is underway.
Today, we have for the first time the situation since the end of the Second World War that the United States is essentially turning against the system that it created. And that is new and, frankly speaking, rather unpredictable.
In an early Saturday post, President Trump told followers on his platform Truth Social to hang tough.
This is an economic revolution, and we will win. Hang tough. It won't be easy, but the end result will be historic. We will make America great again.
Economists say the era of multilateral trade agreements marked by institutions like the World Trade Organization looks like it's coming to an end. The future may see countries moving to bilateral trade deals and networks of their own.
In fact, we see this sort of policy already from some period of time. I mean, after the collapse of the last round of WTO, I mean Doha round, it became clear that there is no more room for multilateral trade liberalization.
For the time being, most of the world is waiting to see how this plays out. All could change as soon as next week.
There's a lot that could happen here over the weekend and early next week in terms of clarification.
Saturday saw massive anti-Trump protests in Washington, D.C., across the U.S., as well as Canada and Mexico. Some 150 activist groups have signed up to participate, and there may be a total of more than 500,000 people taking to the streets to oppose what they say is Donald Trump's all-out assault on government, the economy, and basic rights. Conrad Gorlinsky, TVP World.
And now we're going live to the United States. We're seeing images from Chicago. There are mass protests against the Trump administration at the moment across the United States. Of course, the massive global trade war that Donald Trump has launched by instituting these very high tariffs across the board around the world on U.S. trading partners has very many upset with the Trump administration. Also, the situation concerning the vast cuts to the federal government. But I think really many people are extremely worried about what this will do to their pocketbook and exactly how much the cost of living is going to rise, what this will do to inflation. We know that more than $5 trillion has been wiped off the stock market since these tariffs have been put in place. Therefore, you're seeing a lot of discontent. These images are from Chicago, but there are also large protests taking place in New York City. Transatlantic relations are strained, to say the least. Donald Trump has unleashed a global trade war, not even sparing U.S. partners and allies. The new administration has also threatened to take Greenland, even by force, and refuses to see Vladimir Putin as the aggressor in the war in Ukraine. Many on the continent now question America's role in the NATO alliance. Can Europe still count on the United States as an ally against Russia, or will the continent be left to fend for itself? Joining me now here to discuss the state of transatlantic relations and whether the relationship can be salvaged is Carrie Longhurst, a professor at Collegium Civitas.
Hi there.
Hello, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Welcome. Saturday, why not?
Yeah, no better way to spend a Saturday night. Well, a lot of people are spending their Saturday in the United States protesting these tariffs, amongst other issues there. But here in Europe, I mean, how would you describe the transatlantic relationship right now? Is it a relationship on the rocks, doomed to failure, or maybe a marriage that can be salvaged?
It can be salvaged for sure, but whether it can be salvaged in the context of Donald Trump still being president, I'm not quite sure. But, you know, in previous decades, this relationship has gone through peaks and troughs before, so this is not a brand new situation. But I think the scale of the problem and the lack of a clear solution makes it perhaps even worse than it was before. So salvageable, yes, but hard to see in the near horizon, I would say.
Certainly. How about the UK? Why do you think that the UK got 10% tariffs as opposed to the European Union, which faces 20%?
I think to understand this, you know, it's not through a kind of economics lens or a frame of analysis to understand it. It's through psychology. It's the way in which Donald Trump is kind of playing and tossing around different countries. The UK is obviously outside of the European Union, so we weren't included in the kind of EU level of tariffs. We've got a kind of special deal, let's say. And I think for Donald Trump, this was a special kind of gift, a recognition of the special relationship between the UK and the US, which supposedly exists. And this really explains the difference. But you know, the consequences are still huge, and it's really sent the UK government in a tailspin about how to respond and if, you know, how they can formulate a kind of strategy of retaliation against the US, which they haven't yet. Yet yeah.
They still face the 25% tariff on autos. We see reports that some British auto manufacturers are suspending their shipments to the United States for the time being.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like patchily applied, I guess. There are some sectors I was reading about, certain kind of chemical producers. They could actually gain the advantage in this new situation. Having said that, and kind of replace the Indian and Chinese supplies to the United States, but it's still not clear cut. And I think these kind of tariff strategies from the side of Donald Trump, next week it could change all over again. And also a lot of suppliers in the UK have been trying to kind of work out on different websites how they have to adjust and respond and formulate the bureaucracy with this, and it's just not clear at all. So it's just about chaos and messiness, I would say.
Well, and the UK has been trying for years to establish this new trading relationship since Brexit. Now, concerning the trade war, do you think that these tariffs are set in stone, or do you think that this is an attempt by the Trump administration to essentially, very quickly, in a short amount of time, blow everything up and start new negotiations on an individual basis with countries around the world?
I think it is just that, because, as I mentioned, I don't think there's a good economic reason behind this kind of wash of tariffs all over the world. It really is about shaking things up, creating chaos, punishing the kind of weaker or less fortunate states or groups of economic suppliers around the world. But like I said, it could change all again next week. I don't think it's a long-term strategy at all with a clear goal in mind.
Well, he says he's trying to onshore production, which will take some time, correct? And he's also, well, initially we were told that he was trying to correct the unfair trade in certain areas, right? In Europe, I guess the best example would be American cars face a 10% levy here coming to Europe, and the other way around, it's about 2.5%. So is it possible that this strategy could correct these imbalances and make it fair across the board?
My understanding is not. Again, I don't think there's a clear economic rationale for this. Trade has to be dynamic. The US is a trading country. It needs to have fair and open structures to trade with different countries around the world. The setting of artificial barriers to trade is breaking down, is creating barriers between what should be free-flowing goods and services. It's hard to see whose interest this is, apart from perhaps some kleptocratic individuals or oligarchs who might gain in the short to medium term.
Well, America's tried this a few times before, and it didn't quite work out, did it? Now I'd like to move on to security, and that's also a major issue in the transatlantic relationship. Rubio just said at the NATO summit in Brussels that the United States will uphold Article 5, yet so many in Europe here are unsure that America is now a reliable partner. Are they right, or are they acting maybe a little too harsh on emotions?
I mean, emotions have been really high over the past few months, and I think as Europeans we'd be remiss if we didn't take our own security more into our own hands. So whether we can trust the United States with Article 5 and Europe's security or not, there's a very real reason, a very urgent reason, set of reasons why we should be rearming, as we've already started to do, spending more on defence, and bringing together this coalition of the willing vis-a-vis a peace settlement in Ukraine and then rebuilding Ukraine after that deal has been put in place.
And concerning that, there was good momentum amongst Europeans just a few weeks ago concerning Ukraine and the coalition of the willing. Now top brass from France, the United Kingdom, who traveled to Ukraine to establish the structure and the mandate for participating troops. Do you think that Vladimir Putin will have to agree to European boots on the ground? And when do you think it's possible we might see European troops in Ukraine?
I mean, things have started to move quite quickly from the side of the Europeans, but let's not forget it's not just the Europeans, it's the coalition of the willing, which includes other countries, Australia, New Zealand, all around the world. So it is Europe or the EU plus a whole host of other countries. And I've even heard that the number of 45 countries actually, so 31. So it's a huge number of countries. Whether Putin has to be kind of involved or sanction this, well, no. I mean, Macron, who is the kind of spokesperson or who's going to run point on this, has declared that absolutely not, that Putin doesn't have to give his approval for this type of peace, post-peace agreement and action to actually be implemented at all.
Is Europe maybe a little bit late to the game? This has been going on for 3 years now. Why has Europe not stepped stepped up
before. Yeah,
and...
yeah. Well, this is a typical European story, isn't it? We tend to shy away from hard security and defence issues. Donald Trump coming back into the White House, it was you know, a calibrator for that. It made the Europeans kind of pull together, and so far so good. I'm quite hopeful about this new coalition.
Okay. Well, let's stay hopeful about that. Carrie Longhurst, Professor at Collegium Civitas, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.